Hey everyone! Welcome back to Story Hive. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let's jump into today's story. I made a mistake and cheated on my husband. Now he's ghosted me without a word. I made a dreadful mistake, and I'm afraid I'll have to face the consequences for the rest of my life. You can call me Cindy. I'm 23 years old, and my boyfriend is Cameron, 25 years old. Both of us hail from a small town in Oklahoma. Given that he was a couple of years older than me, we were acquainted but hadn't really connected on a personal level. Our opportunity to get better acquainted came just over 3 years ago at the grocery store where I was employed as a cashier. Whenever Cameron returned from college during weekends or breaks, he would frequently visit our store to grab pre-made meals and a kombucha tea for lunch. I typically worked the express checkout, and if he happened to be there when I was on duty, he'd opt for my register. He always conducted himself with politeness and kindness, and I found him incredibly endearing. The sound of his voice had a way of melting my heart and sending shivers down my spine. I attempted to drop numerous subtle hints to express my interest, but he didn't seem to pick up on them. Then one day, when he was checking out and my line was moving slowly, I decided to strike up a conversation by asking him about his major. I continued asking questions as a way to demonstrate my interest, and after roughly 10 minutes, he finally caught on, just as a couple of shoppers with baskets started heading towards my register. Cameron remarked, "Looks like you're getting busy here. Let me give you my number." And he jotted it down on the receipt I handed him. He departed and suggested that I should call him whenever I had some free time. This occurred on a Saturday, and my work shift ended at 3 p.m. The moment I finished work and reached my car, I dialed his number and we conversed for a solid 2 hours. He extended an invitation for dinner that same night, and I enthusiastically agreed. Our connection was immediate, and we became intimate during our second date, which took place the following day just before he returned to school. It might sound crazy, but that weekend I fell head over heels in love with him. We continued to see each other every weekend, with either Cameron driving home or me making the journey to his college to spend time together. Things were going wonderfully. Upon graduating, Cameron secured a good job in the city, purchased a new Wrangler, and acquired a nice apartment close to his workplace. A few months later, he proposed that I move in with him, and I eagerly agreed. Although my parents weren't entirely on board with us cohabitating before marriage, they supported our relationship. Cameron clarified to me and our parents that this was a trial run to assess our compatibility for marriage. I was overjoyed. Our relationship was flourishing, and we thoroughly enjoyed our lives in the bustling city. After growing up in a small rural town, there was an abundance of activities to partake in and a wealth of fascinating people to meet. We felt like we belonged. I found a job at a locally owned coffee shop just a few blocks from our apartment, and I absolutely relished my work there. The owners were incredibly friendly, and our customers proved to be quite fascinating. I had the pleasure of meeting many wonderful people, and I still maintain contact with most of my regular customers through social media. Cameron and I had been cohabitating for nearly 9 months, while he had resided in the apartment for over 10 months. Consequently, we began exploring other apartments in the area. Even though we loved our current place, we were simply curious to see what other options were available. We visited more than a dozen apartments, and it was enjoyable to observe the various apartment designs and layouts. Should we decide to move, Cameron would need to provide written notice to our landlord 30 days before his lease expired to avoid automatic renewal. A month later, I had joined a local yoga class within walking distance of our apartment, but in the opposite direction from my coffee shop. One of the regulars at the yoga studio happened to frequent our coffee shop as well. Let's call him Ed for privacy reasons. Ed was an attractive older gentleman with a well-built physique. and I estimated his age to be in his late forties, around the same age as my parents. Ed had always been exceptionally friendly to all of us at the coffee shop. He would spend a couple of hours daily working on his laptop at our shop. Ed had mentioned that he was an entrepreneur, and I assumed he must have been successful since he drove a new Bronco and dressed in stylish clothes with matching shoes and jewelry. To get to the point, one day I struck up a conversation with Ed and inquired about yoga, as I was intrigued by his evident passion for it. I asked if he would recommend the yoga studio he frequented. He recommended that I give yoga a try, mentioning that I would likely enjoy it. I decided to visit the yoga studio myself. Moreover, it was conveniently located within walking distance of our apartment. While Cameron was a member of a large gym located just across the street from his office, it was more than 20 minutes away, and the commute could stretch to 35 minutes or more with traffic. I didn't want to drive my old beat-up Saturn such a long distance. I began attending yoga classes and quickly developed a strong fondness for it. Typically, I would head to the studio immediately after my work shift ended at 2 p.m. This schedule worked out perfectly as I followed a routine of working from 6:00 a.m. to 2:00 p.m., attending the yoga studio until 3:30 p.m., and then returning home to prepare dinner for Cameron. During one of my shifts at the coffee shop, Ed inquired about my experience at the studio. I expressed my enthusiasm for it and thanked him for the recommendation. He asked about the time I went, and I informed him that I attended right after work at 2 p.m. Ed mentioned that he might start attending classes around that time as well, explaining that he planned to incorporate hot yoga into his routine a few days a week, with those classes starting at 1:30 p.m. Additionally, he revealed that he spent 3 to 5 days a week at a local gym engaging in weightlifting and boxing. A couple of days later, I encountered Ed at the yoga studio. We engaged in conversation just as we had done at the coffee shop. I gave it a shot and found that I loved it. As time passed, we began spending more and more time together at the studio, taking classes together. In hindsight, I can see how inappropriate this was, but at the time such considerations never crossed my mind. This continued for several weeks until one day I can't explain why or how it, and I found ourselves back at Cameron's apartment on a Thursday afternoon, where we did something truly regrettable, a mistake I deeply regret now. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for my actions, but I reluctantly agreed to meet Ed again at his place the following Monday, as I didn't want to show disrespect to Cameron by bringing Ed back to his home. Ed's apartment turned out to be in a rather sketchy neighborhood. It was quite sparsely furnished, featuring only a couple of old chairs, a television, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a modest double bed, and an aged dresser. It wasn't what I had expected, and I considered leaving. In retrospect, I wish I had, but I didn't want to come across as impolite. It became evident that Ed was not the prosperous entrepreneur I had assumed him to be, as he seemed to have invested most of his money in his car, clothing, and jewelry rather than his living space. Following that encounter, I informed Ed that we needed to terminate our relationship because I loved my boyfriend and didn't want to jeopardize what we had. Ed regarded me cynically and chuckled, suggesting, "You can't possibly love your boyfriend. If you just did what you did, can you?" I replied, "I do love him more than anything." He retorted, "Well, you may love him, but your desire for me outweighs your feelings for him by far." It was a harsh reality check for me, and I insisted, "No, that's not true." I gathered my belongings and left Ed's apartment. As I exited, I felt tainted and incredibly foolish for my actions. This wasn't characteristic of me. I promise it's not. I don't know, but what happened with it occurred during a time of the month when my hormones often feel uncontrollable. This isn't an excuse. I'm simply attempting to make sense of my actions. I spent the rest of the afternoon in tears until Cameron returned home. We had dinner, watched television, and relaxed on the couch, but I noticed that Cameron seemed distant. He had been feeling unwell for several days, so I assumed it was because of that. On Tuesday, he appeared normal but still kept his distance, mentioning that he didn't feel quite right. It had been nearly a week since we had been intimate, and I started to worry about his health because we usually weren't abstaining. Looking back, I suspect he might have known about Ed and me and was keeping his distance. On Wednesday, I got home just before 3 p.m. and reached for my apartment key, but it wasn't on my key ring. I began to panic, wondering if it had somehow fallen off. The key itself wasn't broken, and all my other keys were still there, but the apartment key was missing. I considered calling Cameron, but decided it was better to search for it first. After frantically checking my purse and car, I found the key. I hurried to the front door of our apartment, only to discover it had been changed. I was devastated, not knowing what to do. I attempted to call Cameron, but my calls went unanswered. I tried texting him, but there was no response. Eventually, I sought help from a neighbor who gave me their phone to call my parents. They arrived and took me home. The next morning, my parents took me to the police station to file a report about my missing apartment key and the potential eviction. They had their suspicions too, but I assured them there was no way Cameron would have kicked me out. Later that day, Cameron called my parents and informed them that our relationship had ended. He revealed that he had been aware of my affair with Ed and had already moved out of the apartment. He indicated that he wasn't interested in reconciling and wanted to cut all ties with me. Cameron's parents also called mine, expressing their disappointment and agreeing with Cameron's decision. I was devastated. I realized I had lost the love of my life and felt like the lowest person on earth. It wasn't just about losing Cameron. I also had to deal with the shame and regret that came with my actions. At this point, I feel like I'm in a pit of despair. Cameron won't return my calls, and I don't know where he is. I feel like I'm a terrible person who deserves to be alone for the rest of my life. The guilt is overwhelming. I'm sorry for everything and would do anything to turn back time and undo my mistakes. It's been a couple of weeks since Cameron left, and I've been trying to piece my life back together. I've moved back in with my parents, which is incredibly humbling after the independence I had enjoyed. I'm still working at the coffee shop. Seeing Ed at the yoga studio has been another blow. He's been there almost every day, and he tries to talk to me, but I can't stand being around him. The thought of what happened with him makes me sick. I've been reflecting a lot on my actions and trying to understand what led me to make such terrible decisions. I don't want to make excuses, but I realize that I was seeking something: validation, excitement, or maybe just a distraction from the routine. I don't know. It's clear now that I should have communicated better with Cameron instead of turning to someone else. My actions were selfish and hurtful, and I deeply regret them. I've tried to reach out to Cameron through letters and messages, but he hasn't responded. I understand why he wouldn't want to. What I did was unforgivable, and I have no right to expect him to just forget it. I've also been seeking therapy to help me process everything and work through my guilt. My therapist has been helpful in helping me understand the patterns in my behavior and why I might have acted the way I did. I've been reflecting on my mistakes and trying to find a way to forgive myself. It's difficult, and some days are harder than others. I know I need to rebuild my life. He was everything to me, and I can't imagine a future without him. I'm trying to focus on self-improvement and making better choices moving forward. I know that if I ever have the chance to be in a relationship again, I need to be a better person, more honest, more respectful, and more self-aware. I've also tried to make amends with my parents. They've been supportive, but I can see the disappointment in their eyes. They want the best for me, and I'm trying to live up to their expectations and my own. I don't expect forgiveness from Cameron or anyone else right now. I just want to make things right and learn from this experience. I hope that someday I can find a way to atone for my mistakes and become a better person. For now, I'm focusing on moving forward, one step at a time, and trying to find a sense of peace within myself. Thanks for tuning in to today's Reddit story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on more amazing stories. See you next time.